Growing up under the care of a narcissistic parent can shape your identity in ways you may not even realize until adulthood. Narcissistic parents aren't just demanding or self-absorbed. They often view their children not as independent individuals, but as extensions of themselves, existing primarily to validate their egos and meet their emotional needs. What makes narcissistic parenting so damaging is its subtlety. The emotional abuse may not leave physical scars, but it can create lasting wounds that affect your self-worth, relationships, and mental well-being. For many people, it takes years to even realize that what they experienced wasn't normal parenting. It was manipulation masked as love. The patterns are complex, and the consequences profound. But once you start to recognize the signs, you begin to understand the truth about your upbringing. Here are 8 major signs that can help you identify narcissistic parents and reflect on how they may have shaped your life. They make everything about themselves. A narcissistic parent has an uncanny ability to turn any situation, conversation, or milestone into a spotlight on themselves. Your achievements become their bragging rights. Your struggles become a source of shame they try to suppress or twist into their own victim narrative. If you came home excited about a school award, they might respond with a story about how they were even more successful at your age. If you felt hurt and sought comfort, somehow the conversation would shift to how your feelings were a burden to them. It's not that they don't hear you, it's that they don't know how to care without making it about them. Empathy becomes conditional, and your emotions are only validated if they serve a purpose for their image. This kind of self-centeredness isn't just annoying, it slowly teaches you that your needs don't matter unless they benefit someone else. Over time, you learn to suppress your emotions, diminish your voice, and prioritize their ego over your own healing. You become a background character in your own life story, conditioned to keep the peace by staying small. They lack emotional empathy. Empathy is the cornerstone of nurturing, healthy parenting, but narcissistic parents often lack the ability or the willingness to put themselves in their children's shoes. When you were hurt, confused, or struggling, their reaction might have been cold, dismissive, or even mocking. Instead of validating your pain, they might accuse you of being dramatic or overly sensitive. Rather than listening, they interrupt. Rather than comforting, they criticize. Their emotional range is limited to their own feelings, and any discomfort you express is seen as an inconvenience rather than a signal to offer care. This emotional detachment teaches children to distrust their own feelings. You might have grown up thinking you were too emotional, when in fact, you were just emotionally neglected. When a parent lacks empathy, it creates an environment where your internal world is never mirrored or nurtured. You end up craving emotional connection while fearing vulnerability, never quite understanding why relationships feel so unsafe. They manipulate you with guilt and obligation. Guilt is one of the narcissistic parents' favorite tools. Instead of open communication or mutual respect, they use guilt to control your behavior and choices. If you didn't obey, they made you feel like a bad child. If you sought independence, they painted you as ungrateful. Their love was conditional, tied to how well you fulfilled their expectations. After everything I've done for you, they'd say, not because they were actually selfless, but to make you feel indebted. You were taught that your role was to serve them, make them proud, or at least keep them satisfied. Boundaries didn't exist because your individuality was a threat to their control. Emotional blackmail replaced support. They didn't just want you to do what they asked. They wanted you to feel bad for ever questioning it. And because they framed their manipulation as love, it became difficult to recognize the abuse for what it was. You might still struggle with guilt when saying no, even in healthy relationships, because that sense of duty was hardwired into your sense of self. 4. They're obsessed with image and appearances. For narcissistic parents, appearances often matter more than authenticity. They care deeply about how your family looks to outsiders, and your role was to maintain that illusion. You had to behave, look good, achieve highly, and never reveal the dysfunction at home. Behind closed doors, they might yell, belittle, or ignore you. But in public, they were all smiles and praise. If you ever tried to speak out or set boundaries, they labeled you as disrespectful, difficult, or rebellious. It was never about truth. It was about preserving their social status. This obsession with image can be especially suffocating because it requires constant performance. You were likely taught that love was earned by playing a role, not by being your authentic self. This pressure to appear perfect can leave lasting anxiety, even in adulthood. You might still feel the need to impress others, hide your flaws, or avoid confrontation at all costs. The mask your parent made you wear becomes your second skin, and peeling it off feels terrifying. They struggle to respect boundaries. Narcissistic parents often view boundaries as threats to their control. If you ever tried to assert yourself, Whether emotionally, physically, or mentally, they pushed back hard. Privacy was non-existent. They might have gone through your belongings, monitored your conversations, or questioned every decision you made. When you expressed a need for space or autonomy, they interpreted it as betrayal. In their world, your life was an extension of theirs, and any attempt to separate was seen as disloyalty. They didn't just cross boundaries, they denied your right to have them. This disregard teaches children that protecting themselves is wrong. You may grow up with no concept of personal space, feeling violated yet unsure of why. You might struggle to say no or feel guilty for wanting solitude. The inability to maintain healthy boundaries can seep into your adult relationships, making you vulnerable to further manipulation. You learn to expect invasion, not respect. And healing means relearning that it's okay to exist as your own person, without fear of backlash. They compete with you. In healthy families, parents celebrate their children's growth, but narcissistic parents often feel threatened by it. When you succeeded, instead of cheering you on, they may have downplayed your accomplishments or inserted themselves into your spotlight. They wanted to be the smartest, the most admired, the center of attention. Even if that meant competing with their own child. You may have been criticized for talents they didn't possess or dismissed for opinions that didn't align with theirs. They couldn't stand being wrong, and they rarely gave credit unless it served their own ego. This toxic competition creates confusion. As a child, you needed a mentor, but instead you got a rival. You learned that being too good made you a target, while mediocrity kept the peace. You may have dimmed your light to protect yourself, holding back your brilliance to avoid conflict. And even now, you might feel uncomfortable with success, unsure if it's safe to shine. Because the one person who was supposed to lift you up was busy trying to stay one step above you. They don't take responsibility for their behavior. Narcissistic parents rarely, if ever, admit they're wrong. If something goes wrong, it's always someone else's fault, usually yours. They don't apologize sincerely. Instead, they might deflect blame, rewrite history, or twist the narrative to protect their ego. When you confronted them about their behavior, they may have gaslighted you, making you question your memory or feelings. That never happened, they'd say. Or worse, you're too sensitive. This refusal to accept accountability teaches you that your reality is unreliable. You learn to doubt yourself, apologize even when you're not wrong, and carry the emotional burden for things you didn't cause. Over time, this erodes your self-trust. You may struggle to stand up for yourself, fearing conflict or assuming you're always at fault. The lack of responsibility on their part leaves you emotionally abandoned. Instead of guidance, you received blame. Instead of support, you got silence or anger, and you were left to pick up the pieces of their emotional immaturity. 8. They use love as a weapon. Perhaps the most devastating trait of narcissistic parents is their conditional love. They give affection and attention when you conform to their expectations, and withdraw it when you don't. Love becomes a tool for control, not a source of safety. As a child, you learn to perform, to please, and to suppress your truth in exchange for approval. You may have been praised when you obeyed and ignored or punished when you expressed autonomy. This unstable love teaches you that you must earn worthiness. You grow up afraid of rejection, desperate to be good enough, and unsure of who you are without validation. The idea that love should be unconditional becomes foreign. You may enter adult relationships repeating these patterns, choosing partners who mimic your parents' behavior, mistaking emotional roller coasters for love. The wounds are deep, but awareness is the first step to healing. Understanding that the love you received was manipulative helps you unlearn the belief that your worth is tied to performance. Growing up with a narcissistic parent doesn't just shape your childhood. It reshapes your entire sense of self. The messages they send, whether overt or hidden, linger long after you leave their home. You carry the echoes of their control, their coldness, and their conditional love into your relationships, your self-talk, and your ability to trust. But awareness is a powerful tool. By recognizing these signs, you begin the process of reclaiming your story. You start to untangle your identity from their shadow. Healing from narcissistic parenting isn't easy, but it's possible. It begins with validating your experience, setting boundaries, seeking support, and learning what healthy love truly looks like. You are not alone, and you are not broken. You are someone who survived emotional manipulation and is strong enough to break the cycle. It's okay to grieve the parent you never had. It's okay to walk away from toxicity, even if it's family. And it's more than okay to give yourself the unconditional love you were always worthy of. The journey won't be linear, but every step toward self-understanding is a step toward freedom. You deserve to feel safe, seen, and valued, not for what you do, but simply for who you are.